Turning back to the special congressional election in Georgia, as we mentioned, Jon Ossoff is one of the frontrunners in this Republican-dominated race. And according to our numbers, the Democrat has taken an early lead, but there are still many votes left to be counted. But in order for Ossoff to win the seat outright, he would need to get more than 50% of the vote. If no candidate reaches that threshold, the top two contenders, regardless of party, will be placed in a runoff election. Now, for a closer look, I want to turn to CBS News Elections Director Anthony Salvanto and congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes, who is in our Washington bureau. I'm so excited to have you both. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Anthony, let me start with you. What do we know about the results and the methodology to get those results?
Well, you're right. It's early. Polls closed 2 hours ago, but takes a while to count all these ballots. And so what we're looking at is early vote in right now. I'm seeing Ossoff, the Democrat, at 58% of what's in, and that was with 9% of precincts reporting. So again, to emphasize, it is very early. But there's a bit of a story in that, which is that's mostly early vote. They usually count the folks who voted early and voted absentee first, and that's what is in that count. He needed to do well in that early vote because Republicans typically do better on the election day turnout. The question is whether that number that he's got now can then sustain if the Republicans did have good election day turnout. Right now, I would expect he's tracking on about what he needs, but we'll see if it holds up.
Okay, Nancy, I know you were in Georgia's 6th District over the past couple of days and spent time with Ossoff. What's he like, and what kind of campaign is he running?
Well, he's the luckiest political novice in America.
Yeah.
I mean, usually, if you're a political newcomer, you're struggling to get your name out there. You're struggling to raise money. These are not problems that Jon Ossoff has had over the past couple of months. He's young. He's 30 years old. He's a documentary filmmaker. He's a former congressional aide, spent about 5 years on Capitol Hill. So he knows his way around politics, but he's running in some ways a very complicated campaign because on one hand, it's obviously that anti-Trump energy that if he is going to win is going to help push him over the top. At the same time, all of that energy, all the help from outside, all of the money, all of the volunteers has left him vulnerable to this notion that he's beholden to national Democrats and not to Georgia Democrats and his own district. And so he's been arguing that this is a local race and it's going to be won and lost on local issues, even though his campaign slogan is "Make Trump Furious."
And Nancy, I remember in one of your pieces you highlighted a robocall for Jon Ossoff from a celebrity. Tell us about that and the potential that something like that in a district like that could even backfire.
Right. It's a double-edged sword. But this, you know, in a special election, Anthony can tell you all the rules sort of go out the window. You basically had to go from 0 to 100 in the space of 2 months ever since Donald Trump named Tom Price to be his Secretary of Health and Human Services. So Ossoff threw his hat into the ring, so did 17 other candidates. They're all scrambling to raise money, and suddenly, thanks to liberal websites, especially Daily Kos, but others as well, Ossoff finds that he's swimming in $8.3 million of campaign cash. By way of comparison, Elaine, the top Republican has raised about $500,000 in that same amount of time. Tom Price himself never raised anywhere near that kind of money for his races, and he was raising money for 2 years, not 2 months. So it's an unusual situation, and he and his campaign have gone to great lengths to point out that even if you just look at money that's come to him from Georgia residents, he's still at the top of the pack. And I even got a phone call from his campaign manager who was very concerned about all of these national stories, pointing out volunteers. And we met them coming from out of state, coming from Tennessee or New York. And he was making the point that, yes, in this final week, there are outsiders coming in to help us. But until last week, it was 95% Georgians who are just as fired up. If you're a Democrat, you're looking for the same kind of redemption in Georgia as you are in any other state.
That's an interesting behind-the-scenes tidbit there, getting phone calls based on the coverage that people are seeing, knowing just how close it could be. So, you know, Anthony, it's been interesting. We've seen President Trump taking notice of this race, posting several tweets about it. What do you think that indicates?
Well, one of the things that's interesting, even as we watch the votes come in, is kind of the time in which this election played out. So if, in fact, the Democrat has done very well in the early vote, that tells you that the Democrats were energized and got that early jump on things. And right now he is, and I can tell up to the second, he's still at that 57% or so, with most of the votes still, needs to be counted. But that's that same day, that election day turnout. If the president is tweeting and trying to get Republicans to go to the polls, that will show up later in the count and therefore a little bit later tonight. So we'll know in about an hour or so, I think, whether he really had that motivating effect on Republicans, if in fact they catch up, and then it turns out they stop Ossoff from getting that 50%.
And it's an open question, Elaine, just how much influence Donald Trump has in this particular district. He kind of underperformed in Georgia's 6th district. He only won by 1 point. By comparison, Mitt Romney 4 years ago won the district by 23 points. So this is, yes, it's a longtime Republican district, but it's suburban Atlanta. It's a diverse district, very well educated. And Democrats believe that if they really have been successful in firing up their voters, that they can pull this off. The tricky thing is that if they are going to pull it off, they have a much better shot today than they will 2 months from now. And that's because you've basically had 11 different Republicans all splitting the vote. You've had national Democrats like the president, like Marco Rubio, getting involved, but they're either saying vote for a Republican or vote for this particular Republican. There isn't a lot of unity around one particular person. If it goes to a runoff, that's going to change, and you'll have Ossoff going up against one pretty well-funded, very well-supported Republican candidate in June, and that'll be a different story.
Nancy, I can only imagine the attention that voters in the 6th district have been getting from the various campaigns. Tell me about what it is that voters told you. What do they make of this situation that they find themselves in, very much in the national spotlight?
Well, Georgia is one of those states that the Clinton campaign believed that it had an outside shot at winning in November. Obviously, that didn't happen. But if you are a Democrat in a state like Georgia and you didn't vote in November, you're probably feeling a bit of regret about that. You're probably feeling like, you'll do whatever it is that you need to do to even show your dissatisfaction with Donald Trump in some small way. Obviously, this isn't a referendum on Trump's presidency in the way that Democrats would like it to be. Clearly, Donald Trump himself is worried that that's the narrative. That's why he's tweeting up a storm about this race. But there are Democrats that I've spoken to, both volunteers for Ossoff who are from Georgia and outside, who say, I woke up on November 9th and I was devastated. And I thought, what can I do? I have nothing, there's nothing that I can do. I want to make a difference, but I don't know how. And so, some of them went to town halls and they protested and they got involved in Indivisible. And this is kind of the next step. This is one of the few concrete ways that Democratic voters, either in Georgia or those who are coming into the state for this race, can really show that that they realize that this is a high-stakes game that Democrats lost in November.
And Anthony, as Nancy just pointed out, for various reasons, it is more complicated than to just simply say this is a referendum. What happens in the 6th district in Georgia is a referendum on the Trump presidency. Nevertheless, how significant would it be if Jon Ossoff is able to pull off a victory?
Both parties are going to want to use this to tell a story, because no single special election ever predicts what happens in 435 races a year and a half from now. What they will do is, if the Democrats win, they're going to say, A, we energized our base. Okay, and I can tell you from the early vote that predominantly the people who cast early ballots were people who already voted in the presidential election in 2016. So the Democrats still have work to do tonight, I think, in making sure that new voters, if they want them, get to the polls, but they'll tell that story. Whereas the Republicans would love to win this, or at least hold on to this, and then say, our base is still with us. So everything that the president still has the ability to motivate Republicans, even in this this district and still hang on to it. Both of those are stories that they'd like to tell going forward and use this as one data point, use this as one example. So that's kind of the thing to watch for what they'll say going through the next year.
And I think it would be sort of a tangible example, Elaine, that Democrats are really not just motivated to get out there and show up at a town hall protest and then go back to their daily lives, but really are focused on the long haul. Look, let's face it, Jon Ossoff may be a nice guy, but most Georgia Democrats had never heard of him 2 months ago. So he's part of the reason that they're motivated to go to the polls. The ones I've talked to like him, think he has the right ideas. But the bigger reason that he's going to get over 50%, if he does, is because of this mix of Democratic frustration, Democratic fear, the fact that they now know that they don't control Congress, they don't control the White House, they are completely out in the cold. Obviously, they've got a long way to go to flip not just the 6th, but the entire House of Representatives. They'd need to pick up 24 seats, not just 1 seat. But they see this as, a small, tangible step that they can take to kind of right the wrongs that were committed by a combination of the Clinton campaign and Democratic voters over the past year.
Yeah, a lot of Democrats really looking for an outlet for their frustrations right now. CBS News Elections Director Anthony Salvanto and congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.